Hello, hello, hello. Anyone out there? Oh dear, sorry about that. My apparatus is collapsing. Like this world that we live in, everything is collapsing around us. I don't know if I'm talking to anyone. If I'm talking to one person out there, that's okay, because quite frankly, I am quite alone. There are people that think like myself, and there are people who are in my circumstances that are experiencing life like myself, but it's not the vast majority for what I can see. But I can't even be sure of that, how many people see things a certain way, or if they just see things the way that they used to appear to me. Okay. I hope you can see me, because I've turned it all out a bit, because it's better that way, because I'm not very good at this, and I'm been a bit under the weather, so it's best that you don't see me too clearly anyway. But either way, I won't waste time. I'm just gonna, if I did one the other day and I got interrupted. Look, at any time I will be interrupted and I'll just have to clear completely off, right? Because so I've got very limited time, and I'm rambling anyway. But the title of the thing was, "We do not live in a logical world." By that I mean, we don't live in a logical world. It appears that we do, and I always lived in the logical world, right? That means the real world, the material world, the world that we see around us, and everything that we think is real and appears to be real and logical, what's presented to us. I suppose it'd be a bit like saying, and this is going to sound weird, but I believe it is the reality, so I don't think there are going to be too many people who are going to see it that way, but there are some that have, that, since I've uh, listened to a few people myself, I realise there are some people who are experiencing the same thing. I have not sorted out. Some people seek these things out. Some people are very intelligent, right? And they're very enlightened, shall we say. I'm not one of those. And I say that quite honestly, even though I might understand and believe everything out of this world, shall we say, that they would preach or that they would believe in and that they would say is the real world. I believe all that. But it's not like I am, some of these people that have sorted out over their life, or even or they've become enlightened, shall we say, because they've reached a higher spiritual kind of level. I'm not one of those people at all. I'm one of your very, very average, to say the least, probably even below average in many ways. At least I've thought that way over my life, because I have, over a lifetime, not progressed, but like I've said, devolved instead of evolved. And I think this is, and I've said this before, I think, and it sounds awful, but at the same time, I think that I believe it to be true that we have not evolved, we have devolved. In other words, instead of making progress every year and over the hundreds and thousands of years, we have become less, not more. Now, most people would not agree with that, particularly as we've gone into this new era of technology where we think that we are advancing and we think that we have more information. We have more information, all right, but what's the point in having more fairy tales? If you're living in a delusion, that's just adding to the delusion, I think, because I say we do not live in a logical world. We do not live in a real world. There is no reality. We are living in a fantasy. We are living in a, it's almost as though humans are living in two worlds. The world they see around them, and then there's another world that they kind of can't see, but that is the real world. The world they see around them that they think is real is not real, and the world that is also around them that they can't see is the real world. That sounds ridiculous. This is where I'm coming from now, so I think I'm talking to myself, and I wouldn't be surprised. But this is what is. Now I would have to go for a long, long time to explain it, so I'm just saying things now just very basically. We live in, let's just say that, and I was saying this before, I'm going to try to put two views always. There is one truth probably, right, in this world. There's probably one out of all the, when you've got two options or two crossroads, shall we say, to go down, or if you ask a question about something, right, you've always got an answer. You'll look for the logical answer. This is another thing too, is that's why I say we do not live in a logical world, but we operate as though we do. Humans always look for a logical answer. This is why they never get the right answer and why they are always devolving instead of evolving, because we do not live in a logical world. So if you operate as we all humans have, and I have too over a lifetime, under logic, intelligence, and reason, and black and white, and yeah, and basically logic. In other words, we have to fathom things out based on the information that we are given. In other words, um, if we are operating under a certain education or belief system, in other words, what information we have, it's a bit like, oh, I don't know. I don't want to go too wacko at the moment, or say things, because even I don't like to go into things too much. But it's a bit like saying, it'd be a bit like if you believed, well, like if you watch, oh, how should I'm trying to put it in a way that, a bit like if you were watching a Harry Potter movie. Now, I've not watched those movies, but they're all very magical and stuff, aren't they? Or a fairy tale. You enter, if you don't believe in that, and I haven't watched those things, but I would imagine that, that if you don't believe in it, then even though that exists, you're going to live your life, and your reality is going to be based on the real, even though the Harry Potter weird stuff might exist. And if it does, you're at a great disadvantage. That's what I'm saying. We live in a logical world, but and we operate logically. But if we, and that, what I'm saying is, if I'm sorry about that, if we do not live in a logical world, is what I said. We do not, but we think we live in a logical world, so we operate logically. Everything we do is logical, black and white, material. We live in this material world, what's in front of us, what we can see, touch and feel and smell and taste, etc., right? We do not operate any different. We can't, because we do not have that ability. I think we might have had it once. That's why I say I think we've devolved, but we don't have it now. So even if we are aware that we don't live in the logical world, we still only have those senses to operate in. Some people have a little bit more. That's what I'm saying. Some of the more advanced type of people, I say advanced because they're not really advanced. They're as humans should be. I should be like that. You should be like that. We all should be. But that's like everything, isn't it? If you see someone that can do something you can't do, you think they're more advanced. But in reality, they've just developed what they already had and what we all probably should have and do have, but we have not developed because we are unaware. We do not think we have those abilities. We do not even have that potential. We do not think we have any potential most of the time. But at any rate, like I say, we do not live in a logical world, but we operate logically. I'm getting very confused almost myself because I'm not very good at putting these. I know what I'm trying to say, but I'm not putting it across very well. Some people put these things across very well. I wish I was one of those people. But like I say, we do not live in a logical, practical world, really, but we operate at a logical, practical, reason, intelligent only level, a thinking level. We do not operate in any way at any type of what I would describe as a supernatural level, because even if some people are psychic, right, or they might think they are, and some people are, to the average person that is supernatural almost, because they do not have that and they do not believe in it, or even if they see it in another person or even believe the other person, they think, oh, that's funny, that's they half want to believe, and they may even go to these people, but you know what I'm saying, but they really don't acknowledge that it should be an ability that they also do have and should have, but have not developed. It's been suppressed. Um, yes, so this is it, and I've said this before, but at any rate, if we don't live in a logical world, but all of us humans operate, our whole thinking is only based on logic, and more so, and more so. I'm sure that even that's why I say I think we've devolved, not evolved, got worse, not better, because probably even, maybe a few hundred years ago, there were more people who had that potential or that thinking ability to where they thought, hey, everything isn't logic and whatever. And I think even though our history has been very much um, our whole true history in a way, or at least the history of all the, like we have sort of remnants of some histories, right? But we don't really know why. In other words, like there was a period of time, right? And I'm just trying to think where the churches all got rid of a lot of women, actually killed them, and they've done this down through the centuries because they would have said, hey, that person is a witch, that type of thing. Now, were these people witches, or were we now acknowledged that they were probably innocent people just killed out of superstition? But there is quite the possibility that these people did operate at a different level to the average person, like a bit now. In other words, they may have been operating at a slightly more mystical level, and this probably would have proved dangerous to, shall we say, to the institutions that ran at the time. I'm not sure why, but they must have saw it as a threat to have went to such an extreme, and a pretty terrible thing, I suppose, really, when you think of it. But they were probably just people who realised that there was more to this, so-called logical world than what we think. In other words, if they probably saw that it wasn't a logical world and were operating at a different level. Now, I don't understand all that myself. This is all what I'm surmising, but I'm guessing that they must have been aware that this world is not the concrete world that we see, so they were operating at a mystical level. Um, and this seems to have been the case down through the history, even though I'm not very good at history, but I've looked into it a little bit just very recently. And there's been a lot of destruction down through the centuries where people have deviated from the so-called norm. And this is because, it is very much a world, I think, now, and always has been, where, like I say, it's not a logical world, and it's not a concrete, real, solid, material world either, even though that is what we appear to live in, and that's what even I can only sense. But I know that that is the delusion, um, that there is much more to it, and that it is not just this concrete practical, logical 3D world that we live in. But proving that is another thing. So people have to experience a bit for themselves and have to start to see things before they can actually, even if you look at the world now, you'd think that in some ways that a lot of people should probably look at it and say, hey, what in the hell is going on? What is wrong? Like, why are human beings who generally are just looking for a comfortable life in many ways and just wanting to enjoy themselves and be happy? Well, that seems to be the consensus, I guess. Why is it all such chaos all the time? If you look at like the whole world, like not even just but even if you look at individuals, if you look at it, sometimes you'll see personal arguments. You see it on a small scale in a little way, and then you see it in a big scale chaos. I mean, there's very little real harmony over the whole thing a lot of the time, and this is it. And yeah, I know that sounds ridiculous in a way, but if you think about it, if you can just get your head around it, this is how the planet, if you want to use that word there again, I don't know about planet, this, that, or whatever, because if it's all a bit of a delusion, I'm not sure how even all that works, right? But it doesn't matter. It doesn't really matter. See, we're so locked into that kind of concept, and even I still can't get away from it. You still can't get away from that we live on this ball and we this and that, and it probably doesn't really matter, but how true, and because it's all a fantasy, and I suppose you could say it's a kind of, I'm trying to find a word and I'm not educated enough to get the concepts across with the right words. It's almost as though everything is a kind of psyop, a kind of, and even that word, I'm not sure if I'm using it correctly. I don't even know. It's like, that means that it's a program, a psyop, a program. We're all programmed all the time. We're all confused, because it's like if you watch a program on the TV, right? You become influenced by that, and you enter into that program while you're watching it. The program overtakes you. You enter into the spirit of that, and that's how we are on this planet. We are all very much programmed, because we're always being influenced by everything that's around us, and all of this is not real. So we're living in a fantasy world where everything around is manipulating us in a way, because we in a way, if you look at it this way, if we're living in any world, whether it's real or not, every time I interact with anything, that is manipulating me. Every time I talk to someone, that's a manipulation of me in a way, and I also am manipulating them. But or you know what I mean? Like now, when I'm talking here, I'm also trying to manipulate, but probably wasting my time, because, as I say, if we don't live in a logical world, then I'm not going to be able to manipulate you very well, or change your idea, or even show you my way of looking at things, because you're going to be operating on the premise that we live in a logical world. So my manipulation of you or anything around me is going to be very less, because everything else is operating in a logical, material way. And so if I sort of think that that is not real, and that there are other factors involved, then I'm almost operating on my own because there isn't going to be that real interaction because I'm coming from a different space, shall we say, than you. So, but anyway, I think I'm not explaining this very well. But but I guess what I'm saying is it's a bit like if two people have a conversation even and they've got opposing views or different views. So different views. A lot of people think because you have a different view that it's an opposing view. I mean, I'm saying that we still have this real world here in a way. We still have this material world in front of us. We can't get away from it because we're trapped in it, right? So even though I'm saying we don't live in a logical world, we don't really, this is not the real reality, doesn't change the fact that we are trapped in it. You know, we can't see beyond it. I know it's not real, but I still can't get beyond it because I'm trapped in it. It's like it'd be like you're like a prisoner. That's right. It's like it'd be like yeah well, it's like you're in jail, right? You're in a jail, but you're aware of a jail because you can see the bars. Um, this world is like we are trapped because we can't see the real world. So we're kind of trapped in this world that we think is a real world, but it's more like a prison because we are trapped in it and we can't see that it's not real. And because we think it's real, we are trapped in it. Whereas if you go to jail, you become very aware that you're trapped, you know. But in reality, the people that are in jail right now are no less prisoners than me or you. In fact, some of them might actually be might be more aware even. Who knows? I don't know. But you know what I'm saying? Because they're in a jail that they can actually see, so they're aware of it. But the people who are on the outside are in jail too. They just because they can't see the bars are invisible. They don't know they're in the jail, but they are. So you know, because if you're living in a delusion, if you're living in a delusion, and what you think around you is real, but it's not, um, then you are trapped and you are in a kind of prison. It's a mental prison, but hey, it's a bit like someone I knew many, many years ago. In fact, it was a relative, long since gone. They used to say, hey, I wouldn't care if I went to jail because that's okay. It's all in the mind. You go to jail, you get your meals, you've got your bed. It probably wasn't, he was like, you know, is it that much? It is a mental thing. I suppose that'd be like that Mandela guy. He was in jail for years, wasn't he? And he survived. So it is a mindset. I mean, we are very much mental creatures, human beings, and that's something where we've lost that because we have become so very physical. We are more and more trapped. And that's why we have devolved instead of evolved, because we have become more and more intellectual, more and more logical, and more practical, and more physical, instead of becoming more and more developing the instinctical side of the mind, the other aspects of the mind which were given to us, but we've let them die off almost. And that's why we're living in a delusion, because how can we be at our optimum peak or develop properly if we are living in an illogical world? We are not living in a logical world, but our mind has now been transformed into being totally intellectual and totally logical. So we're at odds. And so we're in a fantasy, and we're going further and further away from the reality, the real world, and from the truth, and from what we should be perceiving. Because how can we be functioning at an optical level if we go more and more down the technological, the logical, the intellectual, the real, the so-called real, the so-called physical world, if we are really not living in a real logical world, if we are really living in a fantasy, a delusion, a uh, a construct that isn't really there, shall we say, how can we possibly evolve or get better? We can only go down the logical path more and more, the intellectual path more and more, the use even the technology to to help us even more and more. So we get further and further, so we are devolving more and more. But this world that is not a logical world, that's not changing. That's always been the same. So what I'm saying is that we are not aware of this. So instead of evolving, we are going further and further away from evolving. We are now human beings are now, in my opinion, at the very worst that they have ever been in their entire history. That is the opposite to what a lot of people believe. A lot of people think the opposite, that we are now headed towards this great thing where we can enhance everything and make ourselves superhuman and make ourselves better by adding and by even using the advances, so-called advances of science and technology to improve ourselves and to better ourselves. And we actually believe that. We actually think that we're headed towards this utopia where man can become superior intellectually. But like I say, if we're not living in a logical world, and intellect and logic are actually our enemy, but we believe they're our God and our salvation and our only hope for the future, this is the problem. And I know I haven't got it across right. I know I sound screwy. It would have sounded screwy to me even not that long ago. And it still sounds screwy when I put it that way, because I know how everyone thinks and I know how I've always thought. And I know that it is hard to say that everything around us is so false, that how can we evolve if it's all a deception and a falsity? And also the fact, as well, I shouldn't say fact, but also that if we do not analyze our knowledge and our information that we get and scrutinize it, we just take it to be true. And yet, that's like anything, isn't it? I mean, we all do that. We all do that. I do it too. You sort of say, oh, you're looking for some information. And the trouble is that the deception is that because we are forced to live in this prison real world, what appears to be solid, shall we say, we get information that relates to that, and it appears to be true, and it does fit and help us at times. So therefore, that reestablishes the delusion, or what's the word? It makes it seem then that the reality is real and that it's true. It's a bit like anything. If you get some information and it appears to benefit you or be correct while you're operating, you see, this is the problem, is that, if you get information and it appears to help you, then it's easy to think that if you get more information, that's also correct. It is a very deceptive, unreal world we live in, but we're forced to operate in this so-called logical world, in this so-called real world. So it really is a minefield. That's what I'm saying. And in fact, unless you really are able to start to see that it's not real and that there is, I suppose you would have to sort of acknowledge that it's all a fantasy. Now, even I find that very hard to walk out into the real world and actually sort of say, hey, this is not real. It's almost impossible because it's like, hey, I see real people around me. I see some stuff that I think is really nice. I see an awful lot of stuff that is not nice, because if you can sort of see what's going on behind the scenes, even what is pretty becomes distressing. Um, but if you can start to see that the world has changed a lot and that there is a lot of weird stuff going on, just little things, you know, I mean, like, I notice it and I point it out sometimes, but other people still dismiss it because they're little indications that things are wrong, even in this physical domain, that um, that even this physical domain is changing all the time. And it's changing because it is not really under our control. Um, you know, we all like to think that we have some control over the physical, and because we are thinking in terms of the physical all the time, that's how we operate. So we operate under controlling the physical. We don't think in terms of the fact that that physical world is not as much under our physical control as what we think, because it is not a logical world. That's what I'm saying. How can you operate in the physical if you are really in a Harry Potter movie? You know what I'm saying? You can do it, but you'll be floundering. You'll be wasting your time. You'll be banging your head against the wall. You give yourself concussion, because basically you will, that will be the real world, but you will be operating in your physical world where that sort of stuff does not exist. So therefore you will be really operating in unreality, but you will think it is reality. You see, do you get what I'm trying to say, or am I not putting it across? If only I could put these ideas across a bit more, because I am just doing it randomly, you see, so I haven't got a script or I haven't thought it out. But, you know, a bit like Alice in Wonderland, I suppose, okay? You know, that type of thing. You know, if you don't believe that Alice can jump through the looking glass, and she was a real little girl, she didn't believe it, but when she jumped through it, she entered into that magical world, and then she saw it in front of her. But if she hadn't went through the looking glass, she wouldn't have believed it was possible. You see, so it's kind of like that too. I'm just trying to find some. But see, if I use fairy tales, then it makes me sound wacko, because. But the truth is that that is the problem in this world, is that it is all wacko in a way. What we would consider to be wacko, what we would consider to be woo woo, as they say, all fantasy. The real world, the world we live in is the complete reverse of what we think. Everything that we think is weird and wonderful and out of this world and strange and not real is a lot more, in some ways, more what is really functioning, what is really happening, and what is the real world, than the real world that is around us. The real world that is around us is an artificial play going on all the time. The real world around us is an artificial play going on all around. A bit like in The Truman Show, right? I haven't seen that movie, but someone mentioned it. And it's kind of like that, where he thought his real world that was around him was real. But it wasn't. It was all just staged and set up. That's the world we live in, okay? We're living like The Truman Show. We're living in a false world, if you want to look at it that way. I'm trying to put it somehow. I'm trying to use examples so that you know a little bit where I'm coming from, even though I know it sounds ridiculous, and it is ridiculous, but that's the way we have let it become too, because as I say, we've gone so far away from even being able to sense these things. In other words, human beings have now lost so much contact with using their senses, not just their sight, sound, and smell ones, which they use to an excess now. We're overburdened with those and with even the logic and the intellect. Like I say, we do not live in a logical world, so it's no use being logical if we don't live in a logical world, you see. That at least makes sense, even if you don't believe me and even if you don't buy it. But, how can you operate practically or sensibly if you operate logically when we do not live in a logical world? You can't. You're just floundering. You're just wasting your time, and you're basically going to go down and down and down because you're not dealing with anything that is real because it ain't. Um, you know, you're almost like, you could say you're almost like just you're living, but you're living in a fantasy world. In other words, you're only seeing a world in front of you that is not real. So, therefore, but like I'm trying to say is that this is because we have become so logical and so intellectual. And I use the word intellectual, intelligent, smart even. But it's no good being those things if they are only operating at a logical, practical, concrete level. If that's all you're thinking and you're only thinking, in other words, it's like this, right? This is how I'm going to put it, and this is how I see it. It's a bit like, right, you have a decision to make, right? And you say, oh, I'm going to think about that. I'm going to think about it logically, practically, intelligently, smartly. I'm going to come to the right decision. And then you get this little flash of intuition, shall we say, right? What people call intuition. And it tells you to do something. And you say, oh, that was a silly thought. Where did that come from? Get away. And then you say, now I've got to think about this logically, intelligently, practically, intelligently, from the concrete information I've got. I'm going to weigh it all up and I'm going to go to the computer and I'm going to get the information and I'm going to do everything very sensibly, very practically, very logically. And you make your decision and it turns out to be wrong. And you sort of say to yourself, that's funny, I got that stupid intuition idea and that turned out to be right and I dismissed it. But, that's just coincidence. That's just, it would have been silly for me to have went with that. It didn't make sense. But occasionally those stupid little vibes that you get turn out to be true, and so you just say, that's just bad luck. Yeah, should have turned out right. I did all the right things. I looked at it sensibly from all angles, from a logical, practical, intelligent, intellectual level. But unfortunately, there's always a variance, so wrong. And that's probably why that silly vibe that I got turned out to be true. But I would have been foolish to have went with that. But then sometimes you do say, oh, I should have went with that hunch, but but the thing is that what I am trying to say is this is where, this business of, the logic and all that sort of thing sounds so good. And it seems sensible because you say we live in this practical, logical, concrete world. So therefore, we should make our decisions based on logic, intelligence, being, intellect, that sort of thing, the thinking, the mind. We shouldn't go on all the silly vibes or the hunches or the things that just come like flashes. How could they possibly be real? They couldn't be. They couldn't be in this so-called real world. And this is what I'm trying to get across, is that, and this is very hard even for me to get my head round, right? And I'll say this, because I haven't advanced either, but I know some people have, very few, but some. And even they probably are not at their peak. But what if we were given all these extra abilities? In other words, maybe Maybe we were not meant to intellectualize everything. Maybe we already should know things. Maybe we were already almost gifted, you could say, to be able to know things without having to scan our computer and without having to rack our brain and come to this or that conclusion and logically. Maybe, if we had just evolved naturally, we would just know things automatically. I believe that, I shouldn't say believe, but I think that there's the possibility, a strong possibility in my way of looking at things, that we should have been able to develop other things as well, other abilities, but we have not. Uh, and that's why I say you have to accept the fact that we don't live in a logical world, because if we operate from the premise that we live in a logical world, then no, that is not going to make sense. It's really not. And it's going to say, hey, how could that possibly be? Why would it be? Um, oh, geez, I'm not explaining this well at all. Not at all. And there would be a million questions, because you would say, why did we not evolve? Well, look, there are a lot of explanations for that. There has been, like, even if you want to take it from kind of biblical type things, right? Because I think there's a bit of truth even in all the deception, and in the setup that we have, there is still a lot of truth, but it's all meshed with so much falseness that it's hard to piece it together. But like, and I'm going to fantasize again, but like I say, there could be some truth to it, right? If you want to go back to a Garden of Eden type thing, if you presume that we were plonked there and we were almost perfect, you could say, and we only had to evolve naturally, but there was intervention there, serpent, all that sort of stuff. I'm not great on the religion, but you know, um, and then we became aware and went down a different path, and that's the path that we have gone down. Now, okay, so that means that it it does fit some validity to the devolving thing, because if you've already been made, shall we say, created, and you're given all the necessary tools and abilities for you to evolve into a supreme being, you could almost say. This is my fantasy. But then you throw that away and decide to go down the tree of knowledge, the tree of good and evil, the tree of knowing other stuff, shall we say? That's interesting. Now, is this a step in the devolving where you've been contaminated, where all of a sudden, there's been manipulation of your abilities? So that means that you're going to go into a practical, logical world where you once were with the fairies, shall we say, almost. I know this is really the truth, where you were once put there with abilities to where you were not as materialistic, shall we say, not as logical, and that was the real reality because you had the ability to see and do things and see a different reality, the real reality. But then you taste of the serpent where he shows you a practical, material, sensatory world. Um, oh. And then you're on the path to devolving, not evolving, because you're going to lessen your senses. You're going to heighten some senses at the expense of losing the others. In other words, if you heighten uh, if your sense of, if you develop one sense over another and that overtakes, then you will go much only down that path of that one sense. Whereas if you were given 10 senses and you only develop one, is that evolving? You might develop that one to a very high level, so you'll think you're brilliant, but it'll be at the expense of your the big picture, the whole lot, the 10, because you're meant to have 10, you're not meant to have one. One is limiting. One means that you can only excel in one realm. And if that realm is not a real realm, then you're developing almost, what you think, if, like I say, if we're living in a illogical world, we do not live in a logical world, but we've developed all our senses for this logical world that doesn't exist. As you can see, we're at a great disadvantage. This is how I see it. And this is a premise, this is a way of looking at it. Now, it's for everyone to decide or to think, because even if you're talking about religion, you are really talking, like, I don't fully understand all that Garden of Eden stuff, right? But if you think about it, why do even religious people not analyze that more? Because it's the basis of their whole faith and their life. They put all their life into it. Surely, surely it's there in a way, even at a religious level, that that we were already created, shall we say, and meant to go along a certain path, and we were tempted, not only tempted, but we went for it, as we always do, because there's always choice. See, we were given evidently free choice, whereas now we have no free choice because we have went down the practical, logical, intellectual, material world way. And that gives us less free choice because we have to live in a material world that is governed by rules and regulations and that sort of thing. So it's there is not as much free choice in a way in that world that we create, which a lot of people seem to like. Now, look, it's suitable for some people. I would not deny that, but it's limiting for others, I would think. But that's a choice too. See, it's a choice. It's like it's still a choice, how you want to live, whether you go along that line. I don't think most of us. Some people would say, well, do you have a choice? You know, you might work in a job and you might not really like that job. Do you have a choice? Because then you need to get the money, because that's the world that we have created, and that's the world we've entered into. So in a way, You limit your choice, your free choice even, that's right. But I guess not putting this very well. Um, and I'll have to try to put another side to it, another alternative view. This is just one way of looking at life, right? Um, Other people will look at it another way. And for some people, it will be practical for them to look at it from the material, intellectual way. It is not for everyone. It's for some people to look at things one way and others another way. Because even in this weird and wonderful world, well, I don't think it's wonderful, but weird world that we live in, but that's perception too. Some people might think it's wonderful. Um, I hope it is wonderful for some of you, but I do not see it as particularly wonderful myself. But, um, you know, if you if you not everyone in this illogical world, in this unreal world, in this created world, not everyone is the same type of being even. So, we're all different and we're all different species. Some people might say we're all human but different nationalities. I would say we are different in more ways than just that. There are lots of different types of um, uh, beings and entities on this in this realm and outside of it, shall we say, too, no doubt. Now, I don't think this has been a very good live thing because I don't think that I have got it all across. And it's because you really need to start from scratch, and I'm not doing that very well. But I'm just trying to start, and then I'll put other ideas forward that might make a bit more sense, maybe. A bit more sense, a bit more oh, to where you can get the idea a little bit better. But essentially, we have to say, is this world real as we know it? And most people probably say, yes, it is. And everything that they think about it appears to be what it is. So it's also like, is even us and our bodies, are they our natural, they are our natural state for being here, but are they our full natural state if we weren't here? Yeah, that sounds weird too, but that's like saying, are our bodies, that we were put here with these natural kind of bodies to evolve naturally, shall we say, with them. They were a benefit to us in this reality. But, when, but we're not meant to stay in this reality forever, as you can see. And even in this reality, the body has now become our preoccupation as opposed to other senses. So we are obsessed with the body, but at a very low material level, and even the body probably does not operate purely at that very base physical level that we think. we're not using the mind as much. When I say the mind, I don't mean like the intellect even. I mean the the higher kind of mind, the development of the full mind. Like I say, the development of everything in the mind, not just developing only the logical, practical. Um, because I mean, just think of it this way too, that even common sense, because common sense seems to be part, but even common sense can apply to the magical or the mystical almost, and the weird and the fantasy. It can. It's just that we don't do that. We think they're all separate. But if you accept that that we're living Alice in Wonderland, then you can still apply the common sense to that, and then you would be on the right path. But it's no good applying common sense to this practical, fake, real world, that type of thing, because if you're really living in Alice in Wonderland, but you think you're living in the real world, then you're at odds even when you apply logic, common sense, or anything, because you're still not operating in the real reality type of thing. How should I'm not putting that well either, but if someone might get it. The only sort of person I suppose that would get it is someone who has already seen some unreality and thinks that way probably. But anyway, I should be starting very simple, really, at a very practical level and then extending it, because, if you start at the top and just say hitting, hitting, it'd be like if you did it to me only a very limited time ago. I would have just walked away, because I'd have said, no, that's it's a bit like if you're an atheist and someone's talking religion, you're just not interested because you don't believe in that. To you, that is not real, and this is the problem. But it would be good if people could just extend themselves a little bit more and just open. I think just at least uh, if only we could open ourselves, because we have closed ourselves to any other possibilities. This is what I say. I think this is what has happened to humans down through thousands and thousands of years, is instead of opening their mind up more to the possibilities and extending, they've closed off to where I mean, I'm not a scientist. Oh, there again, I wouldn't want to go into the science realm either, because even that could be very convoluted. But it'd be like the old saying, oh, well, we have 100% mind, but we're only using, 5%. And, there again, if I get into that type of conversation with the logical world we live in, they'll come back at you and say, oh, yeah, but we are going to use this, or they will come back with some logical thing that I don't know what I'm talking about. And I can respect that. That's okay. But I'm just trying to put the fantasy across to everyone, okay? Take it or leave it. But if we did have 100% mind and we're actually only using 5%, then that is, and we're focusing on that 5% only, and we think that we have to enhance that 5% and then we will get more mind, you know, um, you know what I mean? It's like I, for instance, don't think that it's necessary for us to have um, a mind full of knowledge. I don't think it's necessary for me to know everything in history. I can learn it if it suits me. And I have looked into a little bit recently, because I've never been big on that. But I don't think that that is going to make me a superhuman if I knew every single fact and every single bit of history or every single bit of scientific. No, I do not think that that is necessarily going to make me a superhuman. But people these days, they might think that that can. So that's a choice that, and for some people, for some entities, for some, I say entities because I think that all humans are a bit different too. So I use that word to make myself sound smart, okay? But it may be a true word too. It may actually apply. But, look, I'm not smart, so you've got to use words, right? And and if you use just the very basic words, it really isn't correct to what you're trying to say. But at the same time, it's very hard. But I'm saying that even amongst human beings, it'd be a bit like if we had, um, it'd be a bit like if we actually had, perhaps I won't go into all that artificial type stuff at this time because, oh, I don't know. I mean, but it would be a bit like if certain humans, and when I say humans, I mean what, you know, because humans, the human form is only the casing, the body, the shell of what is inside. So my shell is different to yours, but also what's inside that shell might be different to yours. You might have a different thing inside too, if you're following me. You may not be the same being inside that shell as me. I might be different to you. You might be different to me. And there might be lots of different ones, you know. So that means that what is good for me might not be good for you and vice versa. So that's why even the stuff I'm putting forward may not apply to everyone. This is another point too. So take it as you want to. Like I say, I should be putting two sides always, but because I haven't planned it, I haven't been able to get that together. But what I am saying is, yes, everything does not apply to everyone. So everything that I say is something that only each individual entity can take on and decipher and decide for themselves if it's suitable for them, shall we say. Yeah. And as we are living in a not logical world, not a real world, it's going to be extremely hard for even those that might be the same as me to decipher it and to figure it out and to integrate everything. Oh, because it's a minefield for me. I know that. Even knowing some things or thinking you know some things, you're still at odds because you are dealing with opposing forces all the time too. Don't forget that even if you decide to operate a certain way, if you are not living in a natural environment that is conducive to the development of what you naturally should or are to be, you are going to be met with opposing forces. Everything in this world is good and evil, and is light and dark, and is positive and negative. That is how it has gone. And if you want to go back to the Garden of Eden, I suppose you could say, oh well, maybe it started there, because all I'm saying is that at some point, regardless of whether you use religion or whatever, there was a decision made to where these things came into being, perhaps. And that was where human beings changed. Because that's right, that we were not meant to taste of the fruit of good and evil, of light and dark, of positive and negative, and even knowledge versus what we should have developed and known naturally. Oh, that sounds weird, I know, because how could you say, why would we not want knowledge? The reason we don't, but I'm surmising that maybe the reason we shouldn't have wanted knowledge and don't need knowledge is because it is in opposition to our natural evolution. Because if we were already given everything, we didn't need to taste of the tree of knowledge of good and evil to evolve, because that was a deception. Because if we already had all the abilities, had all the basic kind of natural, real knowledge, because if we're not, we then went into a artificial, unreal world, we're only entering into knowledge of deception, shall we say. I don't think I'll put that across right. But I've done my best. I'll try again. Maybe I'll get it together more to where I can at least, because I think that in this world, even if we, if you're trying to talk to people who are logic, when you know that the world is not logical, then you have to talk logical, even though you know that the logic in itself is a bit deceptive, because it's like you still have to put logic across in order to show that there is no logic, which is kind of bizarre. I'm not putting that well either. In other words, if you're logical and you live in the logical world, but I live in the illogical world, and I know that illogical world is really the real world, the real logical world in a way, you could say, but you live in the logical world. In order for me to show you that this world is not logical, I have to come to you from a logical point of view. So it's very hard, you see, to do that, to even, because most people only come to these things, I think, from, I'm not sure how the few that seem to have done it do come to it, but I know that with me it was just pure accident. It was no searching on my part, it was no genius on my part in any way. In fact, it was pure circumstance. If certain things had not fell a certain way, I would still be living in your logical world, thinking that was the real world. And hey, and there is many a night, almost every night, that I almost wish that was still true. And that's another thing too, is that a lot of people would prefer to stay in that logical world, as bad as it is, because it isn't really good. But, I think most people don't think the world is great, so I don't think they'd almost dispute that in a way. But for some people who are doing all right, they might think, yeah, I want to stay in this logical world. I wouldn't want to go into her logical world where I see everything that is negative as, but but that's, like I say, if it happens to you and it's forced onto you, I wasn't really given a choice. Most people, I think, would probably have to choose, and that is hard because you don't even know you've got a choice, and some people would not want to. Got to go.